That microphone, we've never had a microphone in this room before. This seems to be on the Berkeley emergency. I don't know why. Hello. Okay. No. No. Yeah, good morning. This is, for those of you who may be watching, I'm sure you can't possibly understand what's going on in the room, and those of us in the room aren't quite clear on what's going on. The issue seems to be that Sproul Hall, for the third day in a row, has lost power. What you see here is emergency power. For some strange reason, this beast is running on emergency power. So we are being filmed right now, but no one can see it out there, but we will be able to archive it and put it on the web, and then people who couldn't make it to this meeting will be able to watch this meeting at a later date. But the people that are sitting at their desks expecting to watch right now, I guess are getting a blank screen or an error message. So I just spoke to the building manager or facilities manager, and she said there's something wrong with the transformer. It may get better, it may not. Be careful when you leave the building, because other than, we have lots of natural light, so safety is not really an issue because we're not down in the basement. But it is true that there's a lot of people in here without power and the usual safety. So just to mention that, welcome. Thank you for coming. Thank you for braving the darkness. Was the first floor pitch black? Yeah, that's how it's been. Okay, so it's very weird that 3 looks totally normal. But anyway, so I guess the very first announcement was to try to give you some dates on some of the things that you're expecting from grad division soon, and the power outage has thrown some of this off. So I just want to let you know, summer awards will be posted soon, and then when the summer awards are posted, we then can start providing block grant reports, which we will do. Then we know that your block grant reports will inform how you spend your summer funding or how you support your students over the summer. We also understand you can't spend that and know how you will use your block grant remaining funds until you get your summer awards from grad division. And we recognize that this all needs to come, and it is coming, and we want to assure you that any deadlines on spending your 2016-17 block grant will be extended as needed to accommodate any sort of late information you get about your summer awards from us. It's just, everything's delayed this year. It's just one of those years, but we can accommodate any sort of late timing on our end. So no worries about that. It's just, and we're working rapidly and hoping that this will be resolved pretty soon. Let's see, what did I want to tell you from? We meet all the time about degrees and SIS and all the other things we're working on, so I'm not going to really mention much, except that a lot is happening over the weekend, and on Monday you may see something pretty exciting. We've all been really missing the dynamic student report that used to be in GLOW. And now we have a report that we believe will appear on Monday, and it is no longer called Dynamic Student Report because dynamic means it changes, and this is not. It's static, but it's called comprehensive in the sense that it covers pretty much everything you used to see on that Dynamic Student Report in GLOW, with the exception of appointment history. And that's a whole other problem we're working on elsewhere. But at least this is going to give you that one single report that a lot of you really wanted and has been a long time coming. So I don't want to talk much about SIS today because we talk about it all the time, and what we're really here to talk about today is grad student support and grad life, and that leads to my final announcement, which is that you should have gotten an email yesterday from Larissa and the Grad Student Life Office about some offerings that are taking place for grad students, and one of them I really wanted to highlight for this audience because it really dovetails with what we're talking about today. And that is the session that is being sponsored by Grad Division and Grad Assembly called Know Your Options, Navigating Challenges to Academic Success. That is going to be a workshop on April 3rd in this room from 3:30 to 5. And it's for grad students who perhaps have questions about how to find their options. We're going to have a member of the Academic Senate here to discuss faculty governance and department governance and layout, I suppose. I will be here to share a little bit of what I shared with you in fall of 2015. I gave a workshop on addressing academic progress for students, and in the context of you as GSAOs, how to recognize students in academic distress, how to help them, how to get them under some guidelines and milestone deadlines, et cetera. This is going to be repurposed for the student audience, and so I think it'll be a really great resource. There's going to be some student panelists and other people there. So I think it's a good resource for you to offer or make sure your students are aware of, and it will actually really help backfill what our guests are here to talk about today. And that is where to send students when they have problems and you don't know how to solve them, and you suspect there may be more to it than what they're sharing with you. You suspect their academic problems may be influenced by some personal or non-academic issues, and you need some guidance. There are lots of resources on campus, but these are 4 specific types that we have brought today. How we're going to sort of work it is I'm going to let each group introduce them, or each leader introduce themselves in their office, and then take about 15, 20 minutes to describe their services, take questions from you, and then when we're done hearing from all 4, we'll open it up for about 20 to 30 minutes, depending on how much time is left, for broad questions for everybody on the panel. So I'm racing through my part and my announcements. Are there any questions before we move to strictly student and confidential resources? Yes?
The comprehensive report, will that be in GLOW or in SIS?
That'll be in SIS. It'll be in the reporting center. Okay, so without further ado, thank you for your flexibility and for working with us. Some of our presenters had slides and are no longer able to show them, so please bear with our presenters who are showing their Berkeley spirit as, and we make it happen no matter what. And so please, I'm going to start with Karen from DSP. I didn't actually think out, and I don't know if you did you guys have okay. Then I'm going to let Karen from Disabled Students Program start.
Okay.
And when we have questions, we'll need to run around the microphone and help out with that.
Okay. I don't know. Does this help? Or do I have to actually hold it up?
No, I was just holding it because I didn't take it.
Well, I'll just hold it then. Hi, everybody. I am Karen Nielsen. I am the director of the Disabled Students Program. I've been here at Berkeley for 9 months, which in Berkeley time means I've been here for about a week, because there's just so much to learn about being on this campus and how this campus operates. I have been in higher ed before. I was the director of Disabled Students Program at Purdue University in Indiana, but Berkeley is its own thing, as we all know very well. So sometimes I think that when students are in crisis, DSP might not be one of the first things that comes to your mind in terms of resources that students might need. But in reality, there's a lot that we can do to help students. There are also some limitations around what we can do, so I'll talk about that. First, I just wanted to say that when you think about disability in terms of what DSP can do, disability is pretty broadly defined today. So obvious disabilities, physical impairments, hearing impairments, visual impairments, those are things we tend to think of when we think of disability. But actually, under the law today, disability is much broader than that. Disability is any condition that impacts on a major life activity. And major life activities include things like studying, attendance, ability to be present, breathing, sleeping, eating. I mean, it's a very broad definition. And so our students with disabilities include students with mental health issues that have mental health issues, students with learning disabilities, students with on the autism spectrum, Students who have chronic illnesses is a big part of our student population. So students who have illnesses that flare up over time are also part of our student population. So think broadly when you think about disability in terms of who you might think might benefit from our services. And so when you're talking through with students, what is it that they need? It's not an easy conversation to have with a student about disability. And really, we don't expect you to do that. You're not equipped to determine whether or not a student has a disability. That's our job. So the way that I have that conversation that I encourage people to have that conversation with students is just as you're talking about all the different services that are available on campus, you can add into the conversation. There's also the Disabled Students Program, and these are some of the things that they might be able to help you with. So I'll give you some examples of some things that we can help with. Reduced course load is a big one for students who are in any kind of immediate crisis, or also have ongoing health issues, or challenges that may require them to balance disability management along with their coursework. Some students, when they're in crisis, need extra time for exams. That's something that we can help with. Student might need a note taker in their course because they're having difficulty attending. That's something that we can help with. There's just a whole host of things that we provide that can be helpful to students who are in immediate crisis. Now, the drawback is that we do require students to come with some documentation. And we balance that out. We do absolutely rely on the student's self-report in terms of what their condition is and how it's impacting on their functioning in the classroom. But we also use the documentation to help fill in the gaps and to help us to understand what the actual disabling condition is, and then what are the functional limitations that disability brings. So if you have a student who's in immediate crisis who has no documentation and has never received services for disability, the first thing they're going to have to do is get that documentation. But we work with CPS, we work with the University Health Services. They are very aware of what students need to provide documentation to get the services that they need. And so if a student doesn't have that documentation, then there are ways that we can help them to get that documentation. But the vast majority of your students who have an ongoing disabling condition will have some kind of documentation. One of the things that's different at the college level is that students get to choose whether or not to use our services. And one of the things that may actually be causing crisis for them is that students may come here and think, I'm going to do this on my own. I don't need accommodations. I don't want to identify myself as being a student with a disability, especially at the graduate level. That's very sensitive for students. And so they may actually find themselves in crisis because they're not getting the help that they need to overcome barriers that they have in the classroom. And so in many cases, you'll find that students actually do have a record of having a disability. They're just not choosing to identify. And so your encouragement may help them to get to that point. So I think that's all I'm going to say, and I'll just answer questions. Nope. Okay.
So Karen, I appreciate your prior reference to how to bring up your services in a comfortable way, where you're describing it amongst a number of different services. I do see visitors who are concerned about having to disclose their disability, and sometimes they're asked directly, well, what is your disability? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So one of the advantages to coming to DSP is that once a student discloses to us and gives us their disability documentation, there is no further disclosure that can be required of them from any other university employee. The only thing that DSP will disclose to other people is the accommodations that the student needs. And so in that way, it actually does protect students' confidentiality because they don't have to speak any further or provide any kind of medical documentation to faculty in regards to their condition. Now, does that mean that all faculty respect that boundary? No. There's actually quite a lot of education that needs to happen on this campus to faculty to let them know what is and isn't acceptable when you're working with students with disabilities. So there are faculty that violate that and ask for additional documentation, but students should know their rights. They have the right to refuse that. If they are enrolled with DSP, they do not have to provide that any further documentation in regards to their disability, or even if they're having an episode related to their disability. Yes. Yes, but generally that comes from through a letter of accommodation to the faculty member that's generated by the student. So students may choose not to use their accommodations in every class. So we don't generally provide a list to departments because we don't know which accommodations students are choosing to use in which classes. So the letter of accommodation is generated by our office. The student requests for it to be sent to specific faculty. Faculty get an email that has them go into our portal to view those letters. So that's how the process that we generally follow.
I just kind of wanted to make a comment because sometimes it's confusing for international students.
Yes.
Because they have slightly different rules due
Right.
to their visa status.
Right.
So just making sure that advisors understand that Berkeley International Office has a separate requirement. The accommodation letters do not fulfill the requirement that we need for federal immigration regulations. We need a certain type of documentation for that, and we have a form that covers that. It doesn't disclose the disability, but the individuals completing the form have to have a certain level. It has to be a licensed medical doctor, doctor of osteopathy, licensed psychiatrist, or psychologist.
For a reduced course load, is that what you're talking
For
about?
federal, for visa purposes.
Right, but for the visa purpose that they have to have a certain number of hours that they're attending, or?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
I got
So, so all international students have specific unit requirements for enrollment, and if they go below that, they're in violation of their visa status. And we have very few reasons that we can allow them to reduce course load. One of them is medical,
Right.
but we have our own separate form which covers that, and it is a point of confusion for students. So it's kind of a reminder to our friends at DSP and to advisors that the accommodation letters don't cover us, and it's often frustrating for students because they feel like, I've already taken care of
Right,
this.
right.
Why am I being given the runaround? So it's good at initial points of contact, if they are international, to make sure they understand, to check with Berkeley International Office about what requirements they have that apply to their visa.
I think it would be good for somebody from your office to come and talk to our specialist about that, and maybe we can find ways to make that easier for students as well. Maybe
For sure.
we can have that form available for students.
Yeah, and I think there's an additional challenge because I don't know how well currently the student information system, I don't think right now it's very easy to view whether a student is international. You can't see it at all right now, which we've made apparent to SIS multiple times, but it's hard to identify, and unfortunately it's also causing people to have to ask uncomfortable questions.
Right.
Like, are you an international student? And that tends to go only to certain students and not to others.
Right, and it
so
can
it's
cause
kind of
anxiety.
tricky. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll have you come talk to our office soon. Let's be in touch.
Yes.
Can I ask a clarification question for you?
Yep.
You mentioned that,
I'm sorry, Tiffany, would you take the mic?
yeah, sure. So you had mentioned that in order to get those types of accommodations, there's certain types of requirements that are different than the way we usually do it. You mentioned licensed psychiatrist or licensed psychologist. If we have a student who's connected to social services, where they're working with a licensed clinical social worker?
No.
That does not, okay.
No,
That's good to know.
the regulations are very specific, and that's why we have a specific form that's completed. And we've worked with the Tank Center, so they're pretty familiar with our form.
Okay.
So if they are going through social services is generally aware of that, and often they'll have someone else review and maybe sign off.
Great.
And we also require that students go through the Tang Center for our form rather than their external practitioners, just so that at this point it's because we know that the Tang Center is equipped to properly give us what we need in the simplest way possible.
Great, thank you. This is so informative. It's great.
I know, for us too. So just to clarify though, are you saying that they should go to DSP first and then go to bio? Or what I'm hearing is they need to go to both offices. It doesn't matter in what order.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
it's often good to check with us to make sure we're not surprised and sending them kind of, scary emails about the fact that they're under-enrolled. So it's good to make sure that they're checking in with us before they take any specific action to drop below, because if not, then they get these emails from us that sound kind of scary, and we'd rather them not be worried about that.
So I think my time's up, but one more question. Okay.
You mentioned that you have to provide medical documentation. How do you check the legitimacy of this documentation? Because we have a situation where a student committed a serious academic dishonesty thing and provided us with documentation that they have disability, and the student is an international student. So how can we verify the legitimacy of it?
That can be difficult. We have a whole list of steps that we follow through in terms of looking at the legitimacy of documentation. But at the end of the day, especially with international students, that can be difficult. But I think what helps us is that we don't lean only on the documentation. We also look at the student self-report and the credibility of that self-report and their ability to actually articulate, how the symptoms that they're experiencing, the limitations that they're experiencing relate to the disability that they're describing. And so that going through that process helps us too, to decide, really legitimately what's going on with this student. Because, a student who doesn't really have a condition is going to have a hard time describing how that condition impacts them, if that makes sense. So there are safeguards built into the process. I feel pretty confident that our processes work, but, that doesn't mean that no student ever gets accommodations without, by committing dishonesty. I can't guarantee that never happens, but I think it's pretty rare. So, did you have anything you wanted to add to that? Do you have any thoughts? Okay.
We do call the doctors. Part of the documentation is that it needs to. Part of the requirement is that we have to have contact information from the physician or the specialist that is seeing the student. And so if something isn't clear to us, or if we think that if something's not clear to us, or if we have questions, we do call and have conversations with the doctors and the specialists. So if we receive documentation that didn't have any contact information, that would be one of the first red flags for us.
Right, and then the other thing would be, we are looking for certain types of medical providers. So we're not going to take, for example, a chiropractor telling us that a student has a learning disability. So, there are lots of ways that we legitimize the documentation and the information that we're receiving. Does that answer your question? Okay. All right, I'm going to pass it on.
All righty. Good morning. My name is Marcia Riley. I'm the director of the Ombuds Office for Students and Postdocs here on campus. I've been in the Ombuds Office this summer. It'll be 9 years, but I have been on campus since I started as an undergrad in 1984. So I've been in different departments on the campus, and I feel very privileged actually to be working in the Ombuds Office because I have the ability to really see all types of situations and and all types of students, and it's very gratifying work. So I appreciate this opportunity. I actually had slides because I really try to take advantage of these situations. I think, unlike some of my fellow panelists, our office isn't that well known. Not everybody has heard of the Ombuds Office as opposed to the Tang Center or DSP or maybe even the Confidential Advocate. So I was just going to give a little bit of an overview because I don't always take for granted that folks understand what the Ombuds Office does. I'll try to be brief, though, because I understand there may be questions. Okay, so of course, I'm sitting here because we are a confidential resource. So we see all types of student issues. Essentially, our goal is to be a resource for undergrads, grads, and postdocs who are facing difficult situations that are impacting their student life. Of course, that could be academic or non-academic, and we don't discriminate, and we really don't turn people away. We really want to be at least a place where they can come and talk through their situation, and if we aren't necessarily the appropriate resource, we will, of course, refer and often refer to other places as well. We also do consult with staff and faculty on student-related matters. So even though our office serves students and postdocs, we, of course, do also serve faculty and staff, and we do see alumni. And our visitors do not need to be currently registered students. So it's important to know that because sometimes they've taken a leave or they're not currently enrolled, they're trying to return, maybe they're trying to be admitted. And we also see extension students, so I like to clarify that too for folks. We are focused around dispute resolution, conflict resolution. So our objective in hearing out a visitor's story is to really understand, first of all, like what led them to this point, and as well, what is the resolution that they're seeking? So I don't always assume when somebody comes and tells their story that I know what they want or what the answer might be. I really always try to make sure to say, so I've really, I've heard how difficult this is for you. What is it that you're seeking that will make this situation whole for you? It could just be an apology. It could be just being able to tell their story to somebody, or it could be something much more impactful that requires, of course, participation or coordination with the other party. So my objective is to really try to hear out their situation, get an understanding, also give perspective, because sometimes, of course, these situations tend to domino or touch other parts of their student life, right? And it also has a very emotional impact on them. So oftentimes it's really easy to understand that they may be coming from their perspective and feeling sort of backed into a corner. But sometimes it's helpful as a person who knows nothing about the situation and often nothing about the other parties to be able to ask some thoughtful questions that might open up their perspective a little bit and maybe see other possibilities that they may not have considered coming into my office. So really, our hope is to try to offer as many informal options as possible. Our objective is to focus around informal resolutions. We really feel like those options tend to empower our visitors more than following a formal appeal or a formal dispute, grade appeals, all of those things. Of course, we will talk about them as options, but they're much more limited in their outcomes, and they're much more structured, and the visitor will likely have much less say in the outcome of the situation in a formal process. So we really try to engage them and find out how they may have tried to resolve the situation thus far, or maybe not, or maybe some of the ways that they might try to do that in advance of pursuing a formal resolution. And along the way, of course, we do some coaching. We might, talk about communication skills, when it's best to use email, when it's really best not to use email, when it might be helpful to sort of pause and wait for a response versus really inundating that faculty member with, questions and emails, or just showing up in person maybe to have that conversation, and how to best prepare for those situations. As I mentioned, we are confidential. The only exception to that is imminent risk of harm to self or others. We make it really clear to all of our visitors that we won't talk about their situations outside of our office without their permission. And we are neutral. So unlike advocacy offices, which I greatly appreciate and refer to on this campus, we make it really clear that we don't take sides. We try to maintain our neutrality and objectivity, which also sometimes allows us to help facilitate resolutions a little bit more easily. We do mediate when all parties are willing. We're a voluntary service, so if our visitor thinks, it might be helpful to have somebody facilitate a conversation, we always spend the time with the other person, making sure that they're interested in that service and that they have the opportunity as well to tell their story individually first before bringing parties together. It really helps us in having all perspectives before going into a situation and making sure that the parties also have similar goals and that everybody's clear as to why they're coming together so that there are no surprises if possible. Just a little bit about our office, because you're all graduate student advisors. About 46% of our student visitors are graduate students. Of those students, about 88% are doctoral and 12 are master's students, 12%. Let's see, something else really quickly. The top 5 issues that graduate students bring, which you may not be surprised at. Top is treatment and civility, of course. That's 39%. Communication, 38%. Academic progress is about 27% of our cases. Policies and procedures not clear, 25%. And financial concerns and treatment by advisor or dissertation committee, equally 18%. So just to give you an idea, but we do see everything from roommate issues to, of course, disability or health issues or extenuating circumstances beyond their control. And really what we will often not just refer, but maybe even engage other parties. So sometimes we may bring in somebody from the grad division to talk about options for taking time out or readmitting or changing departments if they have a very difficult situation they just can't see their way out of. So we are certainly not the experts in all areas, and we often refer or will actually bring folks together to try to help the student really understand fully what all of their options are so they can make informed decisions. Okay, I think I'm going to stop there and see if anybody has any questions.
Thank you, Marcia. That was very helpful. Just wanted to ask, what about visiting scholars? Do you see visiting
Yes.
scholars?
Yes, we do. Sure. What is the best way to access your office? Oh, thank you. Thanks for saying that. So the question was, what is the best way to access our office? Because we're a very small unit and we also want to maintain the privacy of our visitors, the best way to refer a student or to contact us is by phone. We unfortunately can't have an open door and have people drop by. It really makes it difficult for visitors who are having confidential conversations to feel comfortable if people are knocking on the door while they're talking. And so really you can refer people to our website to learn about us, but on there is our contact information by phone only. We don't use email because it's not confidential and it creates a record. And we're not a place of record or report. And our door is unlabeled. So even though we are here in Sproul, we're kind of buried amongst the offices, just so that students can feel comfortable and not being labeled and coming to see us. Thank you.
2 years, and I have found when I'm working with someone who's coming to me as a grad student, I often am asking them, have you connected with your GSAO? Because I just have found that all of you are the people who know like so much, and so I really appreciate being here, and I really appreciate all of you. So I'm from the Path to Care Center. You may have heard of us, you may not have. We've been around for about 2 years. We are an office that provides prevention and advocacy services to individuals and communities that have been impacted by certain forms of violence, such as sexual assault, intimate partner violence, sexual harassment, and stalking. The areas that we really cover are things like prevention, advocacy, training, and healing, which is the PATH. That's the acronym that we use. As similar to Marsha's office, we work with a lot of different individuals. I think most people think of us as a student-oriented office, and that's undergraduate and graduate. And I will say that that tends to be a lot of who we see, but we also do work with staff, faculty, visiting scholars, alumni, and basically when somebody walks through our door, or I shouldn't use that expression anymore. When somebody comes to meet with me, you know, it's our goal is to meet that person and try to assist them however we can. Even if it turns out we're not the right place for them, then our goal is to figure out how to get them connected to care that's relevant and helpful to them. We also work with people who've been directly impacted by these forms of harm and people who've been indirectly impacted. So we do work with parents, with partners, with friends, with whole communities, as well as with people who are supporting survivors, right? So that can also include all of you. We know that we know that these forms of violence are happening on our campus. Berkeley, in particular, has gotten some attention for that in the last couple of years. And this is particularly, we know, really relevant for graduate students because we know that graduate people who are in grad school, they're living in slightly smaller worlds, right? They're in microcosm, right? And so we know that the way that they might be experiencing these forms of harm and violence might be distinct from, say, an undergraduate. Also keeping in mind that a lot of our graduate students are advisors to undergraduate students, right? And so we also know that there's that link as well. But recognizing that if one of our graduate students is experiencing these forms of harm, that there's often power dynamics that follow into that, right? Where's the authority? What does that look like? That there are these ongoing relationships. Sometimes there's these shared spaces. There's a lab that they have together. They share the same advisor. Even if they leave the university, how big is if they're studying something very specific, is this something how is this going to impact the rest of their career even when they leave Berkeley? And so I do think that the way we want to be able to provide support to people who are experiencing this is to be able to understand and meet them with what it is that they're dealing with and where their priorities are, right? Because they're not always the same for each person. We know that these things are happening a lot, and we know that not everyone is taking the usual, we know that the statistics around reporting are really, really low, right? And yet reporting tends to be where people go first. It's like, oh, did someone report, right? And that makes sense because that's like an action-oriented thing that feels like, okay, this is something we can do. But not everybody wants that. But the good news is that we know that a lot of people who are experiencing this harm, they do reach out to people, right? They might not necessarily reach out to the police. They might not necessarily reach out to Title IX. They might not even reach out to our office, but they're probably most likely going to reach out to someone that they see as a trusted person, as a peer, as someone that they know, right? And so that often turns into individuals like you. And so with that, what we are hoping for is to be able to work with all of you in the way that we can to be able to provide that best support for that person. I know we talked a little bit about how disabilities can impact people in their studies, right? And we know that someone who's experiencing these forms of violence and trauma, you know, you're going to see things like difficulty concentrating, you know, having flashbacks or having these intrusive thoughts or having trouble sleeping, having trouble eating, and we have to ask ourselves, what does that look like when we ask that person to return to their coursework, their dissertation, and just carry on as normal, right? And we know that that's not a realistic expectation. We went to a training recently where someone put it in the context of saying coping with trauma is like taking a 4-unit class, right? And yet we know so many of our students act as if this is something that they shouldn't be, that shouldn't be impacting them at all, right? And we know that might not be realistic. So when we are working with survivors, things that we need to keep in mind is that this is a situation that they were in that they didn't have any control or choice over, right? And so that oftentimes is something where we need to be able to prioritize their autonomy, we need to be able to prioritize their privacy, and be able to give them care, right? Because we know that these things can have really, really detrimental effects, right? And so our office, we're here to provide support to kind of counteract that. As an advocate, my role, we are confidential, and so people are able to talk to us in a way that really lowers the stakes, right? Sometimes someone might be interested in reporting, but they want to ask certain questions that they're afraid, if I ask this, will it change what my options are, or will I get in trouble? And our office is here to kind of be able to liaison with our partners, right? So for example, I can call a detective down at UCPD and put them on the phone and say, I'm sitting with someone and I'm not telling you their name, but can we ask you some questions? And be able to get that person some of that information that they might need to make a decision about what they want to do next, right? We also provide just general, the way that we support people can really vary, right? So it can be just a conversation about, gosh, this is this thing that happened, and I'm here to support you. I'm here to help you understand some of the reactions that you might be having, talking about ways to ground yourself, ways to take care of yourself. Or it's about getting them the information that they might need so that they can make decisions about what it is that they want to do. Sometimes we have students who are meeting with a Title IX administrator or the police or a faculty member, and how scary is that, right? I mean, even for myself as a staff member, I find that scary, right? And so part of my role is to go with that person to those meetings where I'm not a neutral party, so I am there to try to be there to help advocate and ally with them and see what is it that we can work out together. I help students be able to get accommodations around their academics, around their housing, around their safety and things like that. If there's a shared class, helping them know what are their options to be able to address something like that. And as well as our office is here to be a source of consultation for all of you, in the same way that I use all of you as a source of consultation for myself. But recognizing that when you are supporting somebody who's been through these forms of violence, that can be really scary, and it can also be really confusing, right? And so my goal is always to be able to help other people be able to do that as well. And maybe that just means helping them know what a system or a process might look like, or also being there for that person to support them, because that also can be a challenging or emotional experience. How do you get in touch with us? So same as Marcia, we are also located in Sproul, but we don't make our location public, kind of for similar reasons. Also, as well as we have 2.5 advocates for a gigantic campus, and part of our way of trying to be accessible is that we often go to the places that someone is being met with, right? So if someone was meeting at the International House and they said, I have somebody that we'd like you to meet, I will leave and go and meet with that person. And so if somebody drops by our office, there's a chance an advocate wouldn't even be there, right? And we don't want that person to experience that. So the best way to get in touch with us is also the phone. The way that we have 2 phone lines. We have our office line and our care line. And I have 2 business cards up here. And so the care line card looks like this. I don't know where the camera is. And this is our business card, and so I'll hand those out as well. The way we think about it is, if you are sitting with somebody who has the ability to leave a message or speak to somebody and be called back, and that feels like something okay, and you feel confident that person will follow through, you could call our office line and they should be able to either leave a message or have somebody try to schedule them an appointment. If you're sitting with somebody who is experiencing an urgent situation, or maybe this is that person where you're like, gosh, I really want this person to get connected to care, and they're saying yes right now, and I don't know if they're gonna say yes if someone calls them 2 hours later. You can call the care line, and the way that this works is during business hours, this goes directly to one of our advocates. So I'm not on call today, but there are times when I'll be in the office and my phone goes off and I know whatever I'm doing, that's my priority, right? And so that's an opportunity for someone to speak to an advocate right then and there. As well as being able to set up meetings, set up introductions and things like that. What we really prefer is for people to be able to do what we call a warm handoff, right? So we know that if I tell someone, oh, you should go talk to Marcia, here's her phone number, call her sometime, the likelihood of that person ever following up with that is really, really small, right? But something that I do, and Marcia has experienced this, is I'll be with someone and I'll say, would you be interested in talking to someone like Marcia? And they say yes, and I said, or maybe they say, I'm not sure, and I said, what we can do is we can even call her together right now. Would that feel comfortable for you? And if that person says yes, then we're able to call and make that direct connection. And that oftentimes can be a really big difference between someone being able to get connected to care or know that this resource exists, but maybe take a lot longer or never follow up with that. I think that's kind of where I'll stop, and so I'll take questions.
Oh, yep.
This past summer, you had a great training that was for GSAOs. I'm wondering, are you thinking about something like that for this coming summer? Just another round of that, just to make this all fresh, and perhaps even branch out to include what's going on here today. Because what that did, it made it immediate, and we were able to answer questions and have interactions and so on and so forth. Is that possible?
Yeah, so like I said, the acronym of our office, we're the Path to Care, and it's PATH, and it's Prevention, Advocacy, Training, and Healing. And so when we talk about training, a big goal of ours is also not just to make our office the only place that someone can get care, but to really build the skills and share the knowledge with our partners. So I imagine that is something that, one, I'm glad to hear that you found that training useful, and I can imagine that is something that we would want to be able to have again. Yes.
I think Erin's up.
Can I ask one question? Actually, sorry. Tiffany, can you talk at all about the role of GSAOs as responsible employees and how they might handle a situation where a student hasn't directly said yet that there was a situation that impacted them, but maybe how they might handle it in such a way that it doesn't force them to report?
Absolutely. Thank you, Marcia. So this is a question that we get a lot. I love it. So this is a question we get a lot, right? Because this is a relatively recent development, right? That GSAOs are suddenly are considered responsible employees, right? And that can feel really tough, right? Because I imagine most people are in your positions because you enjoy working with students, and your students really have that trusting and good relationship, and sometimes that can feel compromising when you realize there's information I may receive that I don't get to keep secret, and how that might affect that relationship and that trust, right? And so what we always encourage our employees to do is, one of the biggest things when working with survivors is being able to acknowledge their choice and allow them to make informed choices, right? As well as really, allowing them to be able to make those decisions. And so it is really important to, as much as you can, be able to let them know up front, these are my obligations as an employee, and I want you to be able to make that decision of whether you want to talk to me or not, right? And so sometimes we're talking to somebody, and you start hearing it go down this path where you're like, I have a feeling that a disclosure might happen. And sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes they come out with it, or it's like an email, and it's out, right? But to be able to talk to them and say, before you go further, I want to let you know a little bit about my position and it sounds like you might be sharing something with me that I appreciate you being able to trust me in this way, and I also want to make sure that you understand what I might have to do if you disclose certain types of information to me. One of the things that we're also kind of talking about is recognizing that we use currently the language is, if somebody discloses that they've experienced a sexual violence, they're told that we have to report this to OPHD. And that is a very loaded and scary word. And what we're actually kind of saying is it's actually, technically what it really is it's a notification. And how different does it sound to say, I have to notify OPHD versus I have to report to OPHD, right? Because I think we need to make a distinction between the fact that OPHD is not invested in trying to force survivors into investigations they don't want to be a part of, right? And that's a truth. There are certain situations where they do need to proceed, where if there's a community risk or something like that. But by far and large, that's not the real situation. And so oftentimes, when I'm working with someone and they know that this information is now going to be shared, I usually tell them, like, what this means more likely than not is that, one, you will get an outreach. You have no obligation to respond to it. And if they don't, they'll more likely than not just continue to outreach you once or twice and then leave you alone, right? But again, it's about being able to communicate to that person, this is what I might have to do with this information. I do want to get you, I do want you to receive care. I want you to be able to decide if this is something you want to tell me. And I also want to let you know that there are confidential resources or there's someone that you could talk to about this who doesn't have that obligation. And I can help you via the care line get connected to them if you would like to. Thank you, Marcia, for the question.
One of the good things about being last is you get to be last. One of the bad things about being last is you hear what everyone's saying and everything brings up lots of things. So while I'm here to talk about counseling and psych services, I think it would be a shame if we're really thinking more broadly about student health, not to try to plug the whole university health service, of which I'm not a perfect expert, but let me do my best, especially because we can't just assume that students who come to you are going to come with emotional challenges. They may very well be coming with physical challenges that might not yet be a disability, but they're needing some support. They come to campus, they're in their first semester, and all of a sudden they have the cold that lasts 2 months, and they're now starting to fall behind. So I will say that the University Health Service is a fairly comprehensive health service. All students, undergrad and graduate students, are assigned a primary care physician and a primary care team, because that's now how they're working. They're working in these primary care teams over there. And I believe that most graduate students have the student health insurance plan. Occasionally they do not. And so we want to make sure that our students, undergrad and graduate for y'all, know that they have access to health care and that they should be taking care of both their physical and their emotional life. And so again, just wanting to, I can't go into the details because I don't have it as much, but wanting to remind you that the University Health Service is a comprehensive space. I also want to say that Counseling and Psych Services, technically speaking, is one of 2 counseling centers. So here we're going to confuse you even more. At the Tang Center. So we have social services and counseling and psych services. Social services is specialty counseling for a very specific group of issues. Social services is where students would go when they're needing counseling associated with a sexual assault or stalking or intimate partner violence. Social services is where someone would go if they're needing counseling related to alcohol or other drug use. Social services is where students go when they're needing counseling related to eating concerns. And social services is where students go when they're needing counseling related to medical conditions. So I don't expect you to hold all that in your head, but do want you, before I go into counseling and psych services, to know there are these other support services there. Having said that, one of the things that's so exciting about being on this panel is realizing that when your students go to the Disabled Students Program, the DSP specialists know about CPS, and they're going to get them to us if we're the ones where they need to go. If they come to us and need to go to DSP, we're going to get them to DSP. If they come to us and need to go to Path to Care, we're going to get them to Path to Care. I recommend the ombudsperson probably more than the ombudsperson wants me to recommend them, because students do come in with conflict that I can help with the anxiety and the sadness around the conflict. I can't per se help with the conflict. So I think our offices do a really good work of collaborating in terms of getting students to where they need to go. Having said that, if you forget everything that I say, and anything, remember that if you want to pick up the phone during the day and call our number, just say, I'm a grad student advisor, I'm concerned about a student, I'd like some consultation. The people on the phone will say, is this an emergency? You'll likely say no. Well, can I take your name and number? And one of our counselors who are on duty will get back to you. And that will happen within a couple hours. And we have that conversation all the time. If for some reason you know, it's after hours, you're reading your email and you're concerned about a student, we actually have an after hours phone number that's meant for students to call in crisis, but you actually can call it for consultation as well. So you really don't, 24 hours a day, you don't need to think that there isn't something for you to get some consultation, and that's available to you. Okay? So that if everything else well actually I'm going to cut down on what I have to say because in reality I have a handout and I don't want to repeat what's on the handout and we can then have time for questions. I will say this. When I started back in 1999, you know, counseling at a university was really about undergraduate student development. Lots of studying about what happens for undergraduates, very little understanding about graduate students. And when a graduate student came in, it was like, ooh, cool, a grad student. That has really changed now that we're in 2017. And some of that change really was sparked by UC Berkeley. You know, unfortunately, it was sparked in 2002, 2003 with a graduate student suicide. But at that moment, a group of graduate students really spearheaded the idea that we are grad students. We are not undergrads. We need to advocate for ourselves in terms of mental health support and get the correct kind of mental health support. So with that spark, they did the 2004 graduate student study. I think another one was done in 2016. I can tell you where some of those results are in a moment, but that really has moved us into a space where when a graduate student comes into our services, we think of them as graduate students, not just as students. It's probably a little bit like why your departments try to have an undergraduate advisor and a graduate advisor. We know that things are different for them. And while some of the basic issues they come in with, transitioning into graduate school after having been at the top of their class in undergrad, you know, very similar to undergrads who are valedictorians and then come to Cal and have trouble. While some of those issues may be the same, they're different in terms of where they're at in their life. And so we do offer individual brief counseling for graduate students to talk about that. We have psychiatry in our services. We have group counseling. One of the things that's really underutilized by graduate students is our group counseling. And on the back of a form I'll hand out are our groups for this semester. They're all closed because we're only 7 weeks left in the semester, but they're an example of what graduate students have access to, specifically for graduate students. Really exciting groups. We added a dissertation support group this week. I'm having trouble. We added a dissertation support group this year, which has been really well attended. You know, and again, it's very unique for our grad student population. We are adding one exciting thing. We are adding a satellite office specifically for graduate students next year. So that'll be a place where grad students can go. One of the things we hear from grad students is, especially GSIs, is that we don't want to run into our undergrads. And so we want to respect that, so we do have some satellite offices, but there's going to be one very specific for grad students next year, so we'll get that information out to you. Now, having said that, when I have the opportunity to talk to GSIs, I really like to say to them, we want you to role model for your students, both emotionally and educationally. So in fact, when you get seen at the counseling center by one of your students, you're role modeling. I know it's hard for them to hear this, but you're role modeling that students have needs, and that you, even as an expert in your field and as a GSI, you're going to use the supports when you need those needs met. And so again, I know there's a balance in there of wanting GSIs to know they can go somewhere where they might not run into their students, but we also want them to be role models. And some will feel okay with that, others will not. Lastly, in terms of some of the trainings, let me stop. If there's ever a crisis for one of your students, I think a lot of folks know this, but we do have urgent drop-in hours from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. When we are not available, we have that after-hours line that students can call. In terms of some of the trainings we do, I think folks know about the Gold Folder. That's now been well established. Every year you get information about the Gold Folder. You should recently have received information about our new Promoting Mental Health faculty guide and staff guide. My hope is that y'all didn't receive a hard copy because we only have so many. If you want to request a hard copy, on the website there's information on how to do that. This is on our website, and there's actually now an entire section on how faculty and staff can support graduate students due to their unique needs. So I would really encourage you to look through that as well. Lastly, we try to do a number of trainings for faculty, staff each year. So we will, every semester, we'll have at least 2 or 3 QPR, question, persuade, refer, suicide prevention trainings for y'all, and we would hope you want to join in on those. We just finished them now. And then I just piloted yesterday a training that I'm offering for faculty and staff on dealing with traumatic events on campus, because what we're finding is when these events occur, we're really needing to come together as a community, and that the idea that, oh, just the counselors are there to support students is really a fallacy. That most students, when there's some kind of a traumatic incident happening, they want to talk to y'all. So we're trying to train you on how to best support your students when these events happen. So look for those in the future as well. Any questions? Yes.
How will you be communicating when these trainings are available to us?
They go out on whatever that big faculty email that we all get. Faculty and staff email. There's a faculty email, and then there's a campus staff email. So whether those go to your junk mail or not, I don't know. But that's how they'll come out the beginning of each semester.
Are you aware that anyone who has access to student data, specifically their financials, can see any payments, co-payments, et cetera, that are assessed to them through their visits to the Tang Center? And if so, do you feel as though that this might stigmatize a student if someone had access to this record and might, make an evaluation or a judgment?
So are you kind of now specifically asking about that you all now have access to this vast array of information? Do you have access to that? Interesting.
I think what he's correct me if I'm wrong, what you're referring to is that when you look at all transactions on a student's financial account, you can see lots and lots and lots of very small charges that say UHS charge, sometimes for $1.60 or $2.30 or very small numbers, and there'll be 10 or 12 in a row.
Okay.
And it does raise the question of, wow, was that 10 or 12 visits to UHS? Is that a copay split into 12 different parts? So yeah, there is some data, you're correct, that we're getting.
But does it ever specifically say counseling and psych services? It just says UHS?
Just UHS.
Okay. So then.
And it's broken into such small pieces that it's really hard for me to discern what the visit is about or how many visits. But we do see some information we've never seen before.
Regardless, so you're knowing they're going for physical, and you just don't know. That might be above my pay grade in terms of answering. I think where I was thinking is that we often have undergraduate students who are worried that their parents are going to see their CARS account. And so we will talk to students about that, and I believe it just comes up as a UHS charge. And I've talked to students about, telling their parents that they are, because they're students, they have options to go to the Tang Center for a lot of different services, and they decided to go do that. I'll check into that. I don't know the answer to it. Let me say this about the stigma. I may be thinking pie in the sky, but my hope is that students tend to not have issues when, they would say to you, yeah, I went because I had a head cold. Whereas they're less comfortable saying, yeah, I went because I was really struggling with some sadness about transitioning into grad school. Our goal, I think, as a campus should be that those are seen exactly the same. Again, I understand that's pie in the sky, but what I try to explain to students is we want you to see the broken arm and the sadness as the same thing, that you're getting support for what you need. So I will check in, and if there's a way to communicate with you so you can get that out. I think that's something we can't help at this point, given this big system. I'm happy to hear that it's still just UHS. Mm-hmm.
So just in reference to what you said, are there any plans on the part of UHS to have a more kind of specific campaign about normalization of, mental health issues or anything like that? Because I know it's kind of out there, but there hasn't been a specific campaign for the campus about that. It's more person to person that we would be, when we meet a student, but, something where I don't know, I'm just thinking about the kind of things we see on campus where we've been raising awareness about sexual assault and things like that. So I don't know. I'm just wondering if that's something that's being thrown around or maybe a suggestion.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is more than that is that we have had those things. Clearly, they haven't been promoted very well. I mean, I think our Be Well campaign is out there. Our Look for the Signs campaign is out there. We haven't had access to all the, I always think of the signs up, you know, with all the posters and things. We haven't had any of that. I think it's always something on our radar. I don't have anything in the moment that I would say we're doing something. Usually those come from grants. Yeah.
Okay, here's another one.
What is the name of the resource that you have in hardcover?
The faculty guide promoting student health, student mental health. I have cards here that have the link to it on the card.
We were all sent that by email fairly recently, right?
Yeah, everyone was sent it by email. All faculty and staff were sent it by email, and there's a link on there if you want to request an individual copy. I'm going to tell you we probably have about 200 left. First come, first serve.
Mine is a little bit more of a specific question because I have a background in counseling, so I'm very quick to refer students, and I really believe in it. I know that you're incredibly impacted, but I have one concern because I've had two separate students say this to me, that they went in for counseling. They had a little bit of a wait, but then when they got there, they asked for a referral, a specific referral to a certain type of therapist, maybe someone that understood. A lot of these are international students, so understood them culturally was a big concern. And the response for one of them was, sure, absolutely. And then she was referred, and the person was not someone, it was like the same demographics for the other person. So she felt really frustrated and had to tell the story all over again with someone that didn't fit. And for the other person, they said no, basically like this, I'm who's available, and this is the only person that you can see, and so it wouldn't be possible. And so in both of those cases, they didn't go back, and what ended up happening is I encouraged them to go and get referral services outside of the university, but I also just tapped some of my networks for sliding scale services in the area, which was frustrating because it's not really my role, and it created this weird situation with me and them where I made a referral and they had a really negative experience, which was disappointing on a personal level because I value counseling and on a professional level.
Yeah, I mean, all I can say is we hear that feedback occasionally, not often, but occasionally. And all I can say is what I try to do when I work with students and make referrals. If students are wanting a very specific kind of counseling that we don't offer at the counseling center, we try to refer into the community. Again, most students have the student health insurance plan where we have many, up to 200 referrals in the community, and we will look for them to try to find some specificity. If a student is wanting, from an identity perspective, some specificity, we try to meet that need, again, whether it's in-house or whether it's out in the community. The challenge can be wait time, that we do have a number of international counselors, so we have access to that. What I try to do when I make referrals into the community is say, you must use me as a link. And that what I don't want you to do is feel like I'm giving you some names and I'm closing the door behind you. If you have within a week, if you have any challenges making some of these connections, please call me back and let's brainstorm together. Again, I can't speak for any one moment that maybe that was me and I forgot to say that, or it was a time in the semester where whether we were really impacted or our community providers are really impacted, even with the numbers that we have. Or I have heard times where there's such a specificity of a problem and identity that it is hard to find an exact match. But our counselors are really there to try to support the student as long as we can. I'm disappointed, you know, that two people that happened to. And again, we hear that infrequently around campus. We definitely hear from people about concerns about the wait. We'll say this in terms of community referrals, I've had more luck with graduate students than I have with undergraduates, just accepting that grad school is a process. And while they may have a short-term issue right now, that getting connected to a community provider that could be supportive of them throughout their 4, 5, 6 years of grad school is really a benefit for them. And so they don't have to tell their story multiple times. And I have had grad students who say, you know, that really makes sense. Let's work together to get connected into the community. So again, it's painstaking to hear that feedback. But we, you know, in most cases, I think most of our counselors are really trying to connect students to what they think would be best for them, and being transparent when that isn't available.
Okay. Yeah, I think, I mean, just making it clear that there is the referral option. I think that they didn't realize that. And because I know that you had it, and that's why I said you should go back. I know that they connect with all these, you know, folks there, and they'll know that you're a student and everything like that. And they were just like, what does that mean? I'm like, well, it's short term. What would you do after that? So maybe just making that really obvious, and I'll continue to do that and say, like, look, this is short term, but there are options kind of moving out.
Well, and you bring up a really good point, because we do now have a student mental health advisory committee to our director, and he brought up to us in our staff meeting today that the issue they are going to focus on is referrals into the community, and that the students have said we need better access to those referrals. So we're likely going to try to figure out a way to have direct referrals from our website, and better education about it. So you're hitting on a point that, you know, you're not alone in, and we're working on.
Thank you.
Okay, head back to Catherine and then Josh.
Questions for other people?
Yeah.
So I have a question about when to use student of concern services, or that committee. Last year I had a student who committed a violent act, and we knew, because the circumstances were kind of complex, to send or to utilize the student of concern committee. I have another student right now who I could see myself sending to DSP or to health services, but we're in a crisis with the student, because he's a first year grad student, both semesters. He's just not shown up to class and is not responding. So when do we discern between needing, I mean, because obviously I want to make sure he's utilizing services, but I don't know, and he's not in touch. We're all trying to reach out. I think he probably has a mental health problem. I think there's a DSP issue. I think he needs counseling. But because we can't make him get services, and he's just in these particular circumstances, our department is choosing to contact student of concern. So how do we as advisors, is it because student of concern is an intervention service where there's different professionals on that panel that can help that student even figure out that he might need services? I mean, how do we know which service to use in this kind of a case?
I'm going to defer to people who are on the committee.
I'm actually going to take this because I'm on Students of Concern. And students who are of attention or are on the radar of the Students of Concern committee are never present, are never, I mean, it is sort of a referral service in the sense that if you put in you report something on the Students of Concern website, there are case managers who, Becca, Alfred, and Noah, will review that, and they decide amongst the three of themselves whether the problem presented rises to the level where it needs some committee intervention, or many cases don't ever come to the committee, and instead Becca, Alfred, and Noah help the reporter determine what to do next. So if you've experienced, so maybe we should talk more offline, but for everyone's information, you put in a report to Students of Concern, There are people at the other end of that that are assessing what that means, and they're activating resources, and they're looping in people. If it is a complex enough case that they're not quite sure what to do, or they believe that other people on that committee, and there's a list of all those, they were all here last year, and all of those offices are on the website, so you can see which offices are present every single week at Students of Concern. But the ones that we discuss are the ones that have risen to a level of complexity or concern where other members, someone from CPS is always present, someone from DSP is always present, grad division is usually present, et cetera. And so we as a committee will decide based on the case and the reports that are being read to us what needs to happen. And certain people will get activated and will take that back to their office. And if it's a grad student, often I spend my Tuesday afternoons and my Wednesdays reaching out to departments and saying, hey, one of your students is on our list this week, what's going on? So Students of Concern is not a feedback loop in the sense that you're going to be looped in, the student's going to get looped in, and we're all going to talk about the problems. It's more of a way for you out in the community, anybody who is starting to worry about somebody because you're coming across them in a classroom or a hallway or your office, to let some people who will sort of assess the situation reach back out. I hear personally, because we're on this committee and we spend 2 hours of our work week every week on this, a lot of the times people will make reports, and then when Alfred or Becca or Noah reach out, they don't return the calls. They don't, they really want to throw it out and say, I've reported it and I'm done. And that often isn't going to be enough for Students of Concern. And so in many cases, if the case managers can't get the information they need and they can't determine what the problem is or et cetera, then the committee won't ever confer on it, and in many cases, we on the committee don't know what happens either. It goes off, it becomes part of somebody else's workload, and we all hope that the student has been connected appropriately. So, does that help answer your question? And does that explain to others about Students of Concern in a way that's helpful? Okay, and I'm going to wrap us up soon to protect people's time, but this is important.
I would just add to that you don't have to do just one thing either. I mean, you can refer a student to CPS or resources that you think would be helpful, but you can also submit a care report because you're concerned about the situation that's happening. And if it's an emergency, contact the police directly yourself if you're worried that the student is of harm to themselves or others, because that's one thing. We're both on the committee, and sometimes there's not immediate action, because you're submitting a report. But if you're worried about someone right here, right now, and you need more immediate action, you'd probably want to take that immediate action, or you can call CPS, or you could contact one of the care managers and consult with them about what next steps you might want to take. So, I don't want it to seem like that report in itself is all that you need to do, but it can also just be a heads up that you've referred to resources, but you remain concerned about the student and you want to put them on the radar so that additional resources might be rallied to reach out to them, and just so people are aware.
Yeah, and that actually just raised something else, is that you might put in a report about something weird going on, and it doesn't rise to the level of much intervention. But then a few weeks later, someone else puts in a report that something weird's going on, and then a few weeks later, and so sometimes that, after multiple reports have been convened, that's when Becca and Alfred decide they need some committee intervention, because we've heard now from 3 different places this seems weird. So that's kind of how we work. And we can always have Alfred back for more coverage if we need him. One final question, and then I'm going to thank our leader.
I have a question for DSP. So you talked about accommodations in the classroom, but a lot of my grad students are working in labs most of their time. Can accommodations be made to the labs for their disabilities?
It's a great question. So when it comes to accommodations for grad students, they look a lot different than for our undergrad students. And so the short answer is yes, absolutely. That the requirement is that reasonable accommodations and adjustments and policy changes take place in any environment on the university campus that needs to be modified in order to remove any disability-related barriers. So for graduate students, accommodations may look very different than they look for our undergraduate students. So for example, with our PhD students, we may be working on extensions on normative time because they're taking less of a load, or they're needing extensions on time for completing pieces of their thesis. So accommodations can be anything, and when it comes to graduate students, kind of the reaction that Erin had, we have kind of the same reaction. Wow, it's a grad student. It allows us to be a little more creative in terms of the way that we work with them. So, so you should feel comfortable that we'll be addressing whether it's a laboratory setting or a thesis, that we look at each situation individually.
Thank our panelists. I should have written their names up. We did not prepare well for this meeting with the power outage, so I apologize for the chaos. But I do want to thank Karen Nielsen, Marcia Riley, Tiffany Shang, and Erin Cohen for joining us. There are handouts up here. Some of the handouts got passed out beforehand. Please come and avail yourselves. All of us are available for consultations offline. You heard everyone say that we are here to help you, help your students. So thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you next month.